Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here and welcome to B-Ball Breakdown. I'm happy to have Chris Herring, the NBA writer for the Wall Street Journal, on to do a little preview of the Nets versus Heat. Chris, it's kind of strange that we have two Chicago guys going over Miami and Brooklyn, but you think we can do it?
I think we're capable. How are you doing?
I'm good. Glad to have you here. Let's break right into it because there seems to be a bit of an issue with the matchups here and how these teams are going to defend each other. How do you see the Nets defending the Heat starting lineup?
Yeah, well, I think they might have some real difficulty there depending on how Miami decides to play this. They've kind of scrambled some things around. They used James Jones for part of their last series, but I think if they go bigger and they want to play Haslam in there, you could see Brooklyn kind of have some struggles with that small lineup that they like to run out there. Just not sure how they'd want to go about that. They obviously get away with playing Paul Pierce at the four, but you would think that they have to play Pierce on LeBron. It's a matchup that they always like, and a matchup that goes way back to Paul Pierce's time in Boston, even with LeBron in Cleveland. So you would think it's a really simple sort of thing to guard Miami most times in terms of the way you match up and knowing exactly who guards whom. But I don't know that you could do that as easily with the small lineup that Brooklyn likes to run out there.
Yeah, it's not clear to me because we had Allen Anderson starting the last two games of the last playoff series, but then they had Livingston start before that. I don't think that they're worried about Haslam posting them up or anything, but I think the concern could be that if he gets a running start or gets good position down low, yeah, he could actually do some serious damage in the offensive rebounding category for the Heat.
I remember Haslam you were talking about our Chicago ties. I remember Haslam missing a good portion of the regular season against Chicago that year that Chicago and Miami met in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Haslam was huge in that series. I mean, he obviously gives them size that they don't really have and a rebounding grit that they really don't have. And Brooklyn has gotten away with not needing to rebound because of how quick they are and how much they jump passing lanes and how many turnovers they force. But I think in a situation like this, they really could get beaten pretty badly on the rebounding side if they don't have anybody there to take care of Haslam.
Well, let's look at the bench for a second because we have first-year coach in Jason Kidd going up against a grizzled veteran, like at this point, in Coach Eric Spoelstra. So this will be interesting. Did you see anything in this last series that indicated to you that Jason Kidd was growing as a coach and had the ability to make those crucial in-game adjustments that they're going to need in the series?
I thought he did a pretty good job. Someone tweeted me yesterday, and they're like, "Oh, like why is no one mentioning that Jason Kidd's getting out coached down the stretch here by Dwayne Casey?" I was like, I don't know that Jason Kidd can really control for the fact that Darren Williams misses a free throw, and he seemed like he called timeouts at the right times and stuff like that. I mean, it seemed like there were a lot of series where teams just went on big runs in the play, a lot more than normal, especially in the last 5 minutes. A 15-point lead would become a tie and stuff like that. But I thought Jason Kidd adjusted pretty well. I remember that big comeback they had in Toronto where they almost took that game there. He used a lot of guys off his bench and just left Pierce and Garnett on the bench with that run they've made. And a lot of people were saying, do you need to bring those guys back in the game since, those are key guys? Or do you leave the guys out there that have helped you cut into that lead? And he seems like someone that has that sort of thing down. He doesn't mess with the flow of how things are going. And I think it was actually pretty symbolic of how their season had gone when they started to win with small ball, and he just stuck with it. And so I like how he's done. I think he did a really good job. I saw a number yesterday. First rookie head coach to ever win a Game 7 on the road. And so he seems like he knows what he's doing. Can't really ask for much more against going against someone like Spoelstra. I think he's got a pretty good idea of what he wants to do in that series.
I mean, I think he's lucky in that sense because Spoelstra tends to get really glued to their strategy and what they want to do, and they're going to continue to do it no matter what and believe firmly in what their process is. Like, for instance, trapping on those pick and rolls and getting out of position, knowing that they're going to get turnovers that will benefit them. So I think in that sense, Kidd has got a decent matchup there because he knows what's going to be. They're not going to make crazy adjustments, and nor should they because they are certainly the favorites here. What are we seeing from the bench? How are these bench matchups going to happen?
Bench matchups could be really interesting here. I think it's interesting what you were saying before about Haslam and the idea if he steps up and joins the starting lineup. Miami's bench does not have all the weapons that they did last year. You know, Mike Miller, the one time you did see Spoelstra really adjust when they're having struggles in that series against the Heat, Mike Miller was huge for them last year, and you know, can really exploit some things and space the floor for some of those guys. I think Miami's in a tougher spot this year than they were last year if they really get a challenge, because they've got some guys that aren't quite as dependable. You got Shane Battier, who went through a really, really bad cold spell earlier in the year. You know, has gone through stretches where he hasn't seen time. And, you know, you've got some guys that are kind of hot and cold. Norris Cole definitely fits that description. That's part of why Miami's really got to come out strong defensively in this series, because Brooklyn's got a much better bench than they had last year. You know, last season, their starting five was not very good. They didn't have anybody that could space the floor. They've got enough guys that can do that. They've got some guys that are kind of jack of all trades type players in Kirilenko. And so you've got to think that the bench is a little bit more even this year than it would have been in past years, when Miami seemed to have a lot more depth. And you had a guy like Mike Miller that could come off the bench. And, you know, it just seems like this year Brooklyn has a little bit more of a bench to go with that could really give them a challenge even once the starting five comes off the floor.
Yeah, I think it'll be really fascinating because, you know, even a guy like Marcus Thornton comes in mid-season, and I've never been that enamored of his game, but I got to tell you, he's on a good team. He's one of those guys, maybe get him on a good team and he plays better, but, you know, some of the shots he's been making, I just wonder, is that really going to keep happening or not? Can they sustain that? And you know, so you really feel like their bench, in theory, would have the advantage in every one of these games they play in the series?
No, I don't necessarily think they've got an advantage, but I think that they're better suited than Brooklyn was last. I mean, last year it was just such a struggle, and maybe you know, it's one of those things where it's a chicken and the egg thing. Like, is it Chicago's defense was just so great last year in that series, but they just struggled to score so badly. Joe Johnson had a bad series against Chicago this year, and this year it just seems like maybe it's the small lineups and maybe it's the matchups that they're getting, but you know, they can score in a lot of different ways.
I think the most intriguing thing to me isn't Joe Johnson, who I expect to post up a lot and actually do some damage, is the matchup between KG and Bosh. Sounds really interesting to me because they're both sort of very similar players offensively, and they're both terrific defenders as well. So I feel like there's something to be looked at there when you're watching the series to help you decide. I guess the real key here is, will KG play significant minutes?
Yeah, well, KG is definitely an interesting matchup here because for all the five that he's played the last couple of years, pulling him all the way out to the three-point line is not something you've really seen a whole lot. I mean, on some level, it's kind of a smaller sort of issue than what Indiana faced in terms of Antich pulling Hibbert out that far. And Chris Bosh is kind of the one thing he's added over the last couple of years, is having him take all those mid-range jumpers he used to take and take well, and pulling him out an extra 3 or 4 feet. And that's, again, where I think Brooklyn might be really vulnerable here. A, if Haslam gets more time, and B, if Garnett is on Bosh consistently, who's rebounding for Brooklyn? They play with a small lineup, but a group of guys that can rebound pretty decently. Sean Livingston is really big for his position. But you've got to wonder who's going to be on the glass if Bosh is missing those shots. Are they just becoming second opportunities for Miami?
Fascinating stuff. So let's get down to brass tacks here. Let's find out what you think. Who do you think is going to win the series and how many games?
I think Miami gets the series in 6 games. I think it'll be a little closer than what people are thinking. You know, the regular season didn't mean a whole lot, but just researching it, you know, it's only happened, I think, 4 times, maybe 3 times in NBA history where a team swept a regular season series of 4 games or more. Mm-hmm. and then lost to that team in the postseason. And it's actually never happened in a 7-game series where the team that swept in 4 games or more lost a 7-game series. So I'm relatively curious to see how it plays out. Again, the games were so close in the regular season where I think that Miami, you know, those weren't a big deal to them. They've always beaten these teams that get the best of them in the regular season. But I do think Brooklyn's got a little bit of a better chance than what people are giving them. You?
Well, I think that we're going to have that obligatory first game rustiness by the Heat, which they always seem to have because they have that layoff. All teams do that, and all the Nets fans will get really excited about it because they think they have a shot.
Chicago.
And then they might even steal the game 1 because of that. Sometimes it happens that way as well. But I honestly feel like, you know what's funny? I wanted to say in 5, the Heat. But after talking with you, and especially that little stat you just gave us about no team sweeping has ever lost a 7-game series, I have a little bit more pause, so maybe I'm willing to go 6 games, Heat in 6. But I don't think it goes any longer than that, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Heat take care of business. I just feel like there's enough age going on. Paul Pierce just looks old to me, even though he's still effective, and I just have a hard time seeing him being very successful against what the Heat are going to bring on defense.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I mean, I actually, when you were asking me about how they match up, Brooklyn seems like an older version of Miami. I mean, they obviously don't have a LeBron in there, but they kind of, in terms of especially on defense, with the small ball they want to play, that they're completely okay and content with not rebounding as long as it means that they're going to get more turnovers defensively. And the only difference is you think about how quickly and how sharply LeBron and Wade can kind of cut into the passing lanes. Brooklyn's not that fast. Brooklyn is going to try to outsmart you. They've got some of the best IQ between their coaching staff and then the guys on the court with KG and Pierce and Livingston's a very smart player. They're going to try to outsmart you to get into the passing lanes and kind of jump the passing lanes. Miami does a little bit of that, but they're also just so athletic and so quick. And Brooklyn's just a lot older than Miami, and you have to figure that, especially when we're talking about rest, you would think that Miami might be a little rusty, but I'm sure they would prefer to have one game of rust if it means that they can kind of relax. And LeBron was kind of hampered through the end of that Charlotte series, too, is the other thing. I think he said there's something with his leg. So, I mean, you got to think the rest would help them. And I'm sure Brooklyn, with all those older players, rest probably would have helped them a little bit, too. But instead, it's just 2-3 days off.
Yeah, well, it'll be really intriguing to find out. But again, I don't want to get the Nets fans' hopes up too high on this one because it just seems like it's an inevitable task that we're going to get to the Heat I think in the NBA Finals. I'm not sure there's not going to be that much resistance for them. So thanks for coming on, Chris. Great insight, great stuff. We'd love to have you on again and talk some more NBA.
Thanks for having me, Coach Nick. I really appreciate it.
And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel, we're a conversation. You in?